Harry Levine. And Harry is a local columnist here in my hometown newspaper, the Poway Chieftain. And, it's part of the Pomerado News Group. They also do the Rancho Bernardo Journal. And they have these collections of these little local papers here in San Diego. And this particular group, Pomerado News, is owned by the San Diego Union Tribune, which is owned by the LA Times, which is this giant hierarchy of news media. But the Poway Chieftain actually has like a very nice local flavor. It's good. It's good little local newspaper. And I enjoy it. I'll usually reference them for a lot of my content here on my podcast. Well, there was a really interesting op-ed that Harry Levine published, and I wanted to highlight a couple of comments on it. And his title here was "Today's Politics Are Harming Us." And I think that's pretty self-evident, isn't it? We look around and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of divisiveness. There's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of angry people that are fired up, whether you're on the left or the right or somewhere else. So many things in our society have been politicized: sports, news, entertainment, culture. So many things have been politicized. And Harry Levine brings up this idea. He says, while everyone's out there kind of rallying for their team or their tribe, right? Because politics is tribal, like sports is tribal, people lose sight of the other guy. And I saw this, I went, oh, this is perfect, because I talk about this a lot too. How we have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is really the overarching theme of this podcast. And a lot of times people think about that. Well, I demand freedom for me, but they often will try to deny freedom for others. And that's where this idea of the other guy, Harry Levine, brings this up. He says the problem is that no one seems to consider the other people. He says, does anyone care about people on the other side? Does anyone look at policy and ask, quote, how does this create harm, and to whom? I think, yeah, in today's political climate, so many people are just interested in getting a win for their team and kind of screwing over the other side, rather than looking for ways to find win-win outcomes. A lot of people see the world win-lose. That's one of my big complaints with Trump. He's a win-lose guy. He wants to win. He wants to call you a loser. There are other people that are infatuated with lose-win relationships, where they're altruists and want to fall on the sword and take one for the team, so other people can benefit. But I think the win-win is what we should be seeking here. And I think Harry Levine brings up a really good point, because a lot of times people, when they get what they want, end up creating harm for other people. And sometimes that harm is very direct. In other cases, it's kind of indirect. And I want to talk about a few of these cases. But he goes on to say that we face a crippling intolerance of ideas, philosophies, and needs that are not in line with our own. And he's right. And that's part of what I'm trying to do in this podcast. I mean, I have my own philosophy. I talk a lot about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, about having a life where you could be free of coercion and go out there and live your life with gusto. You only live once. Go out there and flourish. Be all that you can be. And you can only really do that in an environment that supports freedom, but not just freedom for you, freedom for everyone. But a lot of times people are intolerant of ideas. I mean, I go driving down here, Pomerado Road in Twin Peaks, and on Sundays, you'll still see the Trump supporters out there. I haven't seen them the last few weeks, but I don't think I've been out there when they're out there. But I'm sure they're still coming out on Sundays. And they're all for their guy Trump, but at the same time, they're like slamming other people. You see a sign that says freedom, and then right next to it, there's a sign that says build a wall, which is like freedom for me, but not for thee. Or you'll see people saying they want freedom, and then right next to it, there's a sign that's denouncing women for wanting to have the freedom to manage their own body, to, essentially have the rights to their own reproductive system. And you got all these conflicts. And we see the same thing in other cases where people on the left are demanding more and more social services, but they want to raise taxes on the other guy, raise taxes on the rich, raise taxes on the upper middle class. They can afford it. They need to pay for what we want. Like the infrastructure thing on the water, that's why I was saying pay for what you use. We should all pay for what we use. But there are a lot of people that want stuff for free and they want to make other people pay. So this win-lose idea goes in both directions, right, left, and left, right. But he asks these questions, why do we have this crippling intolerance of ideas and philosophies? Again, part of this podcast is talking about these ideas, getting new thoughts and opinions. That's why we have the community forum. That's why I invite live chat during my podcast, is to get other people's thoughts and opinions. That's why we interview political candidates, to get different thoughts and opinions and to talk it out like rational civil adults and have a conversation, long form in many cases, free of all the punches and the jabs, but really just kind of talking things through. We can learn a lot. And I really like this article. He says, today's my way or the highway mentality rejects the aim of serving the common good. Now, this is an interesting kind of turnoff that he makes in this article, talking about the common good. Because what is the common good? I mean, what's good for me may not be good for you or good for your neighbor. There, if it's good for 51% but bad for 49, is that a common good? And if it's bad for 49%, does that make it good? I think this idea of a common good is kind of an abstraction that is disconnected from reality, because you can't really define what it is. It's not objective, it's subjective. And we can talk about benefiting the common good, in my way of thinking. I mean, if there is any form of a common good, which I think is debatable, it would, from my perspective, would be that you just respect the rights of others, that you are free to live your life the way you want to live it. And at the same time, you should respect other people to do the same thing, as long as they're not harming anyone. But the outcomes that we pursue in life are going to all be different. And we're going to make choices, and good choices and bad choices. And it's really hard to come up with a quote common good. Usually, whenever you hear someone preaching about the common good, that means someone else is about to get screwed over, which is kind of goes back to Harvey's main theme about this idea of winners and losers and divisiveness. But he does bring up a lot of good cases. He says the Speaker of the House is threatened with expulsion by his own party if he doesn't support the extreme right. And yeah, that's definitely happening. Kevin McCarthy has sold his soul to the devil. Kevin McCarthy has, in a desperate attempt to hold on to power, has made deals that he likely is not going to be able to fulfill. And he may get kicked out of his post. We'll see. But he's in a very precarious situation, not at all on solid footing. The California legislature spews out bill after a bill that impose policies that are well out of the reach of localities and are insensitive to the needs and rights of the locals. Now, this is an interesting angle too. I think they're talking about housing. And here in Poway, there's a lot more housing being built. And there's housing being built in a lot of other parts of San Diego. And part of the reason is because a lot of the local control over housing development has been eroded by Sacramento, because so many NIMBYs, not in my backyard, in a lot of these communities have been able to keep development at bay, have been able to prevent development, have been able to minimize it, and to keep open space open, and to keep single-family neighborhoods, because they want to keep things the way they want it. And that's slow down the development of housing. But you know what? We're building more housing. Is that a common good? I think here, even if some of the locals don't want it, still, is it a common good? Because housing benefits people, not just the developer making money, but it benefits the people that get a roof over their head, where housing is just so darn expensive and so few vacancies in San Diego. It's hard to find a place. So again, debatable. What's common good? He goes on to say the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG, insists on using a weighted voting model that mutes voices of the smaller communities. And that's true too. A lot of some of the smaller cities here are really angry at SANDAG because they believe that their input is being diminished. Some would argue, well, you're a small city, you should only have small input. Debatable point. But a lot of this my way or the highway stuff coming down. Um, we're seeing this definitely. There's no doubt about it. This is happening all around us. He goes on to say, we are at an inflection point. Unless we are ready to accept a totalitarian leadership with widespread exclusion of the masses, and that means us, we must, with pen and ballot, exercise the power granted by the Constitution to promote candidates who would break the deadlock and commit to a platform based on justice and inclusion, a platform to support the common good and to do no harm. Okay. Again, we'll break this down. The common good, again, I think is debatable. We can talk about clean air, clear water is common good. Okay, that's probably about as close to it as you get. There's a lot of other things that if 80% of the people like it and 20% don't, is that common good? Well, for the 80%, it's common good. For the other 20%, it's not. So whose rights should be trampled in some of these cases? So common good to me is tricky. Do no harm. Well, take housing for an example. If you're preventing a property owner from building on their property, are you harming the property owner? I would argue yes. If you are, and are you harming other people that are looking for places to live and there's less inventory? Indirectly, yes. Other people think, well, if you allow more housing to build, then there's more traffic and more strain on infrastructure, you end up harming other people. But again, I think if people are free just to live their lives peacefully, that's not necessarily harming others. It's not like someone is got a gun to their head, not like someone is being mandated to pay higher prices or is suffering material damages. If you can prove that, then that's legit. But if you're just simply inconvenienced by more traffic, is that harm being done to you just to let other people live freely? I mean, I think we have to, kind of figure out a way to get along with all this. But he also goes on to say a platform based on justice and inclusion. Okay, inclusion, that's a loaded term these days as well. Of course, we don't want to discriminate against everyone, but sometimes people take inclusion so far that they kind of lose sight of the fact of just providing access in general to the public rather than favoring one group over the other group. That gets tricky. But he is right, though, that we need to elect candidates that are not so darn tribal. We have candidates that are heavy right wingers or heavy left wingers that have an agenda and they don't want to compromise with the other side. You have to ask yourself, are these people really serving your best interest? And is that part of the problem that we have now is because our elected officials have become so polarized? And is there maybe a third way? Is there maybe a better way? And that's why I'm always very open to the idea of looking at candidates that are independent or third party, that had new ideas, new ways to kind of shake up the model and find ways that we can all live freely without oppressing one another while respecting each other's rights. So anyways, Harry Levine, I think, brought up a really good article because, yeah, in many cases, the politics are harming us. No doubt. I mean, the divisiveness and rhetoric in this nation is out of control in a lot of cases. I mean, heck, we've had. I mean, we can go down a list of all the things that have been going on in the last 3 to 4 years with government shutdowns and with January 6th and all the other nonsense that's gone on in California. Particularly with the COVID policy specifically. I mean, people getting arrested for paddleboarding in Malibu. City officials filling up skateboard parks with sand, putting 2x4s over outdoor basketball hoops, shutting down restaurants with outdoor eating was insane. And that was government policies harming us. They think they're trying to help the common good, but in the end, they end up harming people. And I think we have to look at what's the role of government here. In my opinion, government is meant to protect our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a means if someone is, we have cases of murder and rape and assault, theft, robbery, fraud. That's where government needs to step in. And you can make an argument, well, since our existing model is that government generally owns most of the infrastructure, like we're water and roads, and we can debate whether they should be in that business in the first place, but they are, and therefore their effort should be there as well. But in a lot of other cases, you kind of wonder, why is government even involved? And we haven't even begun to talk about the story in Chicago. We're talking about having the grocery stores there run by the government. We'll get into that one as well. So what are your thoughts? Let me know on the live stream